Okay, everyone, I think we are going to get started. Our first presenter just has a half hour with us today, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by his presentation. So we want to make sure that we use his time wisely. Thank you for everyone attending the session. I think you'll find that this session will really change your practice with families, but also probably also change how you do things in your life. Our first presenter is Dr. Chan Hellman. He is the Director of Hope Research at the University of Oklahoma. He's also the author of Hope Rising. If you haven't read this book, it's highly suggested. It will change your practice for how you work with children and families. And it will, like I said earlier, probably change your life. Chan's belief is that we can all overcome what has robbed us of hope. And that's through using some of the principles you're going to learn about today to increase hope and resilience. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Chan.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and welcome everybody from cloudy, rainy Tulsa, Oklahoma area. Thank you for taking a little bit of time to listen to the science of hope and engage in this session. So as Sarah mentioned, I'm a professor at the University of Oklahoma, where the Hope Research Center is located. I've been doing the science of hope for the last 15 years. In particular, I have focused on how hope leads to significant positive outcomes. And in our life can rob us of hope. And then more importantly, what are some simple strategies that can be used to nurture and restore that hope? So that's been the focus of all of this work. My area of focus has been in areas of domestic violence, child maltreatment, homelessness, food insecurity. And so I'm going to give a brief overview in just a few moments on the science of hope in the context of those three kinds of questions, and then end my part of that by talking about some of the work that we're doing focused on creating hope-centered organizations and hope-centered systems that are focused on children, adults, and families, and talk a little bit about some of the work going on around the US. So with that, I'll go ahead and share my screen real quickly. By the way, as I begin to engage in this brief PowerPoint, there's a couple of places where I'm going to ask you to engage and using the chat function. I'll give you a little bit of a heads up, a little bit of a pre-warning so that you'll be ready for that. And I just want to confirm I'm going to move my screen forward. There's been a couple of times where participants don't see the screen moves. So Sarah, I can see you. So if you could just confirm for me that the next, okay, thank you. Thank you. So one of the things that I want to start with around the science of hope is that it really is a shift in mindset in the way that we think about and focus the work towards well-being. I'm a psychologist by training, and roughly 15 years ago when I was introduced to this concept of hope, I'll give a real quick, brief summary of that. And I was working with an organization providing services to individuals living with HIV and AIDS. And in particular, this organization serves individuals and families who are also experiencing pretty extreme poverty. So really day-to-day sort of decisions about where they might be sleeping, whether or not they'll have access to nutrition, let alone getting access to medications and other things they need. And I was introduced to a young man, 19-year-old young man named David, And I always like to start this off by giving him a little bit of honor because he's the one who introduced me to this concept of hope. So David and I had a real brief 10-minute conversation. And in this conversation, David shared with me that 3 months earlier, he learned that he was HIV positive. Now, as a psychologist, the first thing that I began to listen for was driven from this framework of what must be wrong with him. So as David shares with me this adversity that he's experiencing, I have been trained, and I believe our systems focus the framework on trying to understand the deficit. That is, what is wrong with you? And so as I'm listening to David, I'm starting to look for and listen to things like depression, anxiety, emotional dysregulation, etc. And David goes on to share with me that 2 weeks earlier, he had disclosed to his parents that he was HIV positive. They'd kicked him out of the house. He had spent the last 2 weeks homeless in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so again, as David is sharing this with me, I am really listening for all of the things that must be wrong with him given these adversities. And then David did something that changed my life, both personally and professionally. David began to talk about his future. David began to explain or express a desire to pursue a college education. He was enrolling at the local community college. He had already met with an academic counselor. He knew what his major was, and he had his courses lined out. And it just struck me in that conversation that I had spent my entire professional career focused on what is wrong with someone, when what David taught me is one of the things that I need to be focused on are those things that are right with us. What are the strengths that we can nurture? What are the strengths that we can restore so that children, adults, and families have the opportunity to thrive? That was my introduction to this concept of hope, which has led to our training and curriculum program that I'll talk a little bit more about towards the end in terms of the training that we're doing with courts, with foster families, with child welfare system, as well as parents and families. So I'm going to ask you to use the chat function. And one of the things I'd like for you to do is to just think about this word hope. And Sarah, I'm sorry, I'm not able, there it is. I wasn't able to pull up the chat function earlier, but now I've got it. So I was going to ask for your help. What I'd like for you to do is just think about this word hope, and think about what other words you might associate with this word hope. When you think about the word hope, when you hear hope, what does that make you think about? So again, if you don't mind, just type that into the chat function. Thank you. Faith, light, life will get better, vision for the future. Wonderful. Thank you all for engaging in that. Dreams, the future, a better tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you very much. So one more question before I move forward. And again, type this into the chat function. So when you think about the word hope, is hope a feeling? Is it an emotion that we have? Or is hope a way of thinking? So what are your thoughts on that? Is hope a feeling or is it a way of thinking? Thank you, Carol. Feeling, there's a way of thinking. Thank you, both. Thank you all for typing in and engaging in that. I appreciate that. So we treat hope as a way of thinking, and this is very important. This is very important for us to lean in very early to understand that hope is a mindset. It is a way of thinking. And the reason that that is so important is because we know we can teach it. If hope is truly a way of thinking, we know we can teach it. If hope was a feeling, then at best we would be able to help people manage it. But all of the work that we're doing with 3- and 4-year-olds throughout the entire lifespan, we know we can teach hope. We know we can nurture and restore that. So here's the definition that we use, very simple definition. Hope is the belief that your future will be better than today and that you have the power to make it so. So the important part about this definition, if we stopped at the first half, hope is the belief that the future will be better than today. If we stopped there, we'd have to recognize that that's really optimism. Hope is optimism part of this definition. That is that you have the power to make it so. So hope is about with that definition, it's important that hope major components, goals, pathways, and willpower. So goals.
Oh, Chan, I think your audio
each and every one of us from the moment it might
cutting out a little.
yeah, it shows unstable internet. Yep. Is this better?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So each and every one of us, from the moment we wake up until the moment we go to bed, we are pursuing goals. We are goal driven. The question with hope is whether or not we have the pathways, that is the strategies that we can identify by which to pursue our goals. And then the second part is the willpower piece, that is the motivation to engage in those pathway pursuits. Within this context of hope, it's important to understand that both willpower and pathways are required. We have to have both. Now, one of the things that I really love about this definition of hope is, number one, it's very simple. Hope is the belief that the future will be better. But the second thing, and all of the participants, what I would encourage you to consider is that this language of hope is actually a description of the work that each and every one of you do. That is that your program services, your organizations all have goals that you're focused on. And your programs, your program services are in fact the potential pathways by which to achieve those goals. So your programs are pathways of hope. The difficult component is the willpower piece. So I'm going to ask you to use the chat function one more time. And I'd like for you to just consider this word hope. And so just think about what are some common ways, common phrases that we use the word hope. Just think about what are some common phrases that we might use every day. And if you don't mind, just type that into the chat function. And just think about, for instance, here in Oklahoma, we tend to have a lot of tornadoes. And so we'll say things like, I hope there are no tornadoes today because it's quite stormy here. So thank you all for typing that in. Now, what I want to highlight is that while I have a lot of desire for the goal, I have a lot of desire that there are no tornadoes, a lot of willpower. I have no way to control that outcome. I do not have the pathways. So as you consider this new way of thinking about hope, goals, pathways, and willpower, I want to make sure that we understand the distinction between hoping and wishing. Because when we have a wish, it is that willpower, it is that motivation to pursue those goals. And in this case, a wish is passive towards the goal. Hope is about taking action to pursue that goal. That is the distinction. So it's really important that when we use the word hope, that we help people understand goals, pathways, and willpower. Now, one of the things that I want to share with you is what we've learned in our research about how trauma and adversity influence the way we think about goals, identify pathways, and consider willpower. The first, which I think is one of the most profound things we've discovered, is that when we are in the presence of distress, high stress situations, we are much more likely to engage in avoidant goal setting. That is, we tend to set goals around things like, how do I avoid this from happening? When we nurture and restore that hope, we actually see a transition from avoidance to achievement. Some of you may be familiar with Circle of Security as a parenting program. And this is exactly what we found, is that at the beginning of programs was very much an avoidant framework. But as parents and families transition through that program, they transition to an achievement framework in partnership with the community agencies. The other thing that we learn is that we're much better at short-term goal setting than long-term goal setting. When we are in a stressful scenario, to just ask somebody what their goals are, what do they want, almost has no meaning. When you're in a survival mode, when you are dealing with day-to-day stress, long-term abstract goals have very little meaning. And so setting short-term goals becomes a very important strategy to nurture hope. We also know that pathways thinking becomes challenged during times of distress. And so that program services as pathways of hope can help identify what those strategies can be, but also how to engage in problem solving while navigating very complex systems. And then finally, the idea that willpower, our motivation, can become drained by fear and rumination, by worrying about the future and ruminating, having resentment, anger, frustration towards the past. We also recognize that willpower is a very limited resource. We only have so much mental energy to give throughout the day. So these are the things that we've discovered. So I'm going to ask you to use the chat function one more time. And I'm going to be coming to the end of my presentation fairly quickly so that I can talk a little bit more about some of the ways in which we're integrating hope across our systems. But I'd like for you to use the chat function and just respond to this question. What is the opposite of hope? And I'll just invite everybody, as you type in your thoughts on that, is to just watch the words that show up, and you'll see very consistently that the opposite of hope is thought to be despair. But in the science of hope, what I want to highlight is that despair is not the opposite of hope. Apathy becomes the opposite of hope. And so what I mean by this with regards to apathy is that when a parent, when a family, when somebody experiencing high levels of distress, consider the future goal and come to the conclusion that no matter what they do, they're going to fail. So why try? It's the giving up part of hopelessness. Now, despair is still an important part of hope, because with despair, I still have a lot of mental energy. I still have a lot of willpower towards the goal. It's just that my pathways are all blocked. So there's still that component of willpower that's available. The difficult part is that with despair is also a sense of urgency, a sense that we have to get this solved right now, today. And so this is the process of the loss of hope. But the good news is we know how to teach it. And this is one of the things that we've learned over the 15 years of working in very adverse conditions, focusing specifically in areas of despair and apathy. We know we can move the needle. We know we can increase hope. And the reason that increasing hope is so important is because 2,000 published research studies tell us that hope is one of the single best predictors of well-being for children, for adults, and families. That nurturing that hope is not the outcome, it's the process. It's the process that allows children and families to thrive. So we have a very specific set of strategies and curriculum, but it always starts with goal setting. It always starts with integrating what the goals are in the context of the family environment. Once we identify the goals, then we can begin to do the pathways work. And so one of the things we highly recommend is once we set the goal and we identify a potential pathway, is that we engage in opportunities to create future memories of success. Very simply, you might ask, when we're wildly successful in this program, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What is that outcome? How is our lives going to change? And so that becomes the important component. So one of the things that I want to sort of transition away from the PowerPoint is just for you to consider this idea. And one of the things that we know is that imagination is the instrument of hope, that being able to create a vision of what could be becomes a fundamental piece of nurturing hope. And so at the heart of change is our ability to understand the way things are right now in our lives, and in the presence of despair and apathy, to be able to recognize where we are right now. But by connecting with community programs and into caring and supportive systems, then we can begin to imagine the way that things could be. And that is where hope is born, is when we can begin to imagine a future that is different than today. And so I'll just close with this, and a vast amount of our research indicates that being connected to others is one of the single best predictors of well-being for children and adults. And so making sure that that we minimize opportunities for isolation, that we engage in relationship building becomes one of the single best predictors of hope. So I'll stop with that brief introduction to the language of hope, which is part of its power. And I've got just a couple more moments, but what I want to highlight is some of the work that we've been doing, not only in Oklahoma, but also in Washington, among other places, is really rolling this hope-centered and trauma-informed curriculum across our systems. So for instance, working with family court systems, educating judges around the science of hope and what an avoidant goal set looks like and achievement goals. And think about each and every one of your programs and your policies and procedures, for instance. Do those policies and procedures nurture achievement, or do they nurture avoidance? And so we can begin to look at how our organizations and systems begin to set opportunities to nurture and restore that hope, again, for children, for adults, and families. Have done a lot of work statewide here in Oklahoma with our CASA programs. I've trained quite a few of our counties as well as the state level around this science of hope. Our Oklahoma Department of Human Services, which includes our child welfare system, became the first Hope-centered state agency where we trained 6,300 employees around the science of hope, and began to deploy that across the agency, not only for family well-being, and to work with children and to work with communities. But also what we're continuing to find is that when we integrate these hope-centered systems, we see significant reductions in burnout and secondary traumatic stress among those individuals who are providing these important services to our communities. Certainly working with foster families as well to create a more system framework. And then I'll close with the work that we've been doing with parents. And one of the things that we found is that hope becomes one of these significant coping resources for parents and becomes a stronger predictor of parent-child relationship quality over and above what we know about other things such as parenting stress, etc. So our goal is to create a system framework around the science of hope, where every important stakeholder has a shared and common language by which to wrap around these efforts. So thank you very much for giving me a little bit of an opportunity to share the science of hope and some of the work that we're doing.
Thank you, Dr. Hellman. For those of you who can turn on your videos, will you turn on your videos for just a moment? And those of you who can't, that's okay as well, but I sign language for applause. If everyone will applause Dr. Hellman, you can use your reactions if you. Thank you, Dr. Hellman.
Thank you. And I just have to say in closing, I really appreciate the boomer sooner in the chat. So thank you very much.
Perfect.
And thank you all for the work that you do.
And I am going to go ahead and share my screen for the second part of this presentation. So next, I want to introduce our speakers, but before introducing our speakers, I want to, it's moving forward with my introduction anyhow. Before introducing our speakers, I want to tell you that part of this next session will ask you to go to menti.com using either your phone, or you can open another screen on your computer to access that. And I will put that in the chat. Sorry, I have a pop-up on my screen that's making this difficult. There we go. Let me get back to, I'm going to put the website address in the chat. If you're going to need that later in our presentation, we're going to create some word clouds. And so if you can have your phone available and keep that website open, menti.com, then when we get to that portion of the presentation, you will be ready to go. And there's going to be multiple questions that we'll use that website for. So you can keep it open for each question. And I will go ahead and start this presentation and introduce our next speakers. So I am going to pin our speakers. First, we have Heather Cantamessa. She is firstly a parent with lived experience. She's from the National Family Impact Manager at Children's Home Society. Those of you who might not know Heather, she's been with Parent for Parent for how many years, Heather? A long time, both you and Ambrosia.
Over 8 years.
8 years as a parent ally. She has managed the Parent for Parent program in Spokane and is now with Children's Home Society. I also want to introduce Ambrosia. Ambrosia is also a parent with lived experience. She also, I assume Ambrosia 8 years as well. She and Heather were kind of partners at the Parent for Parent program in Spokane. She's now the Family Impact Manager at Children's Home Society of Washington. And I think Ambrosia is going to start off our next presentation. Are you ready, Ambrosia?
I am ready. Thank you guys for having me today.
Perfect.
I'm going to set up my story to just let you know that my story has a lot of missed opportunities in it. And so with that, I'm just going to get into it. I'm Ambrosia Eberhardt, a Washington parent ally with Children's Home Society of Washington, providing oversight and support to the statewide Parents for Parents program. Parents for Parents is a parent-led organization that helps CPS-involved parents navigate their case with specific child welfare peer-like support. I've been reunited for many years and have been working with parents in the system since 2013 and involved in the Parent Ally movement for over a decade. Here is my picture of what despair is. This woman's pain and shame can be felt through this picture. Many parents come into the child welfare system with some level of despair. This parent had almost given up because she had not had much success in achieving many goals she had set for herself and had been written off by many of her family members, some of who were also toxic, and her support system. If they didn't carry the hope for her, she was not worthy of it, right? The opposite of hope is a court petition that focuses on everything she lacks and spotlights her mistakes. Some things are true, some things are not true, and other things are other people's opinions. There was a missed hope opportunity here. Reports at the subsequent hearings could have included things that she did well, the progress she was making, and the goals she had for her family, which would have given her more hope. She was a parent having court-ordered supervised visitations that confirmed that she is not seen as a safe person for her children, even though parents often can be for a short time, and with a monitor that can judge and solidify she's not part of the solution and rather part of the problem to be fixed by a system that is not the expert on her family's life and needs. Having a psych evaluator assess her led to a report that she had a personality disorder and in his opinion was a danger to her children, even though he had never seen her with her kids. Even with a year of positive visitation reports, she is still being supervised, which was very discouraging. That was also a missed opportunity to open up a pathway, but the fact that it didn't change the level of supervision to show she was in fact making progress contributed to a continued decline in her hope. Even up to reunification transition that happened, she was still in supervised visitations. She was not asked what she understood, what her goals were, what she thought her family needed. She was instead force-fed kind of a standard buffet of court-ordered services that if she stayed in compliance with and made progress in, would heal her family so she could be deemed as reunifiable with her children. Once she was able to reunify, it was only with 2 of her children. Her family was forever separated, having some children scattered in Idaho with their dads, one of which is still a severed relationship 17 years later. This affects not only mom, but the whole family and especially her children. Sadly, her guardian ad litem and social worker made up their minds on her, even when things were going well, and decided that the foster parents were the best option. Their opinion was she was not the best option for her children, and that translated to her as not good enough. She met her guardian ad litem twice in her case and once in her home. Things were said in court and team meetings by her guardian ad litem and social worker, like, this mom has always been in unhealthy relationships. She's addicted to meth. She's been abused and neglected by her own parents and has her own struggles with mental health. She has a high ACE score. So how could she possibly take care of her special needs twin? One thing her social worker did give her was a glimmer of hope in not filing for termination at the year mark. And that made a huge difference in her knowing it was not too late to reunify. She had 2 service providers, one being a Circle of Security parenting class provider that had seen the real person, that had gotten to know her, that did home visiting, that also testified contradicting some of what other professionals were saying. And the judge listened and her children came home. She also hired a private attorney that was a cheerleader in her possibility of reuniting and called special experts to testify in the contested placement hearing that focused on things mom did achieve and could do that made her a good candidate for reunification. One person said on a scale of 1 to 10, if she stayed on the path, she was an 11 plus. Talk about giving her hope. She was also given one of her most powerful motivations from the foster parents that also loved her children. She experienced apathy and almost walked away when comparing what she had to offer as a mom to what the foster parents had. She shared this with them and they said, we're scared too. We don't know what's going to happen, but we prayed about it and the answer is whatever God's will is. The fact that they had not written her off increased hope and motivated her agency and willpower to move forward. I wrote this part in third person on purpose to demonstrate how it felt to me, being so uninvolved in decision-making, offered so little choice, not being heard, and reading so many other people's opinions of me. I was a parent that had so many barriers and things that could easily show I was not likely to reunify. I also know so many parents seen through that same lens that did and could fill a room full of these wonderful, resilient moms and dads. I was easily a C-grade parent when I reunited, and much of the wellness was way after reunification, and because I had cheerleaders. This is my story. I only recently got out of poverty. I raised my children with love and community, not money. The children I raised are ambitious and have thrived despite my shortcomings, domestic violence history, relapses, poverty, and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. My youngest is a motivated high school student dreaming of a degree in business. My son is a welder and has a wife and 2 children. One daughter is owning her truth and very intelligent as she navigates her passion to open up a shelter for families to reunite in. And the other daughter is a bachelor's in social work student at Eastern Washington University. The only child I did not raise is hurt and struggles with deep pain and mental health issues. I'm a parent with lived child welfare experience who needed support from cheerleaders that listened to me and asked me goal-oriented hope questions so I could have my own buy-in and build hope in my ability to reunite. I also needed somebody to help me reduce barriers that got in the way of building that pathway. I needed to be successful. Every time I fell short, I still needed a cheerleader to sustain my motivation, that willpower to achieve this for my family. I'll end with this. Post-reunification, I dreaded Christmas for a few years because my mom OD'd right after my case closed. It was negatively affecting my children and their Christmas experience. I noticed and decided to assess my family traditions, some of which were negative, and chose to start my own family traditions. Every year, we tried different things that built pathways in my brain to change my narrative and create positive experiences which replaced the negative. This happened when my hope score was much higher than when I was in a child welfare case, which made it easier to see and change what was going on. I was in less flight and fight mode, so I could see solutions better. My hope score was really low in my CPS case and really high today, with huge resilience. Progress impacts pathways and agency. Success builds on itself, and we all need parents. We all help parents with this. We can all help them. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I just want to thank you all for your time and attention today. It is an honor to be here. This opportunity to support you and your work with families is incredibly valuable to me. My name is Heather Cantamessa. I'm a parent ally with experience from multiple child welfare cases. I have 6 children and 5 of them were involved and removed from my care. We spent 12 years in and out of the system. During my second child welfare case, I entered into a long-term treatment program where you could reunite with some of your kids. I was assigned to a group and told to draw a sociogram of each group member, and they would draw one of me. One of my group members handed me my sociogram, and it was a picture of me of what I thought was hopelessness, until she told me it was a picture of my despair. And I just wonder, how many of you have pictures of yourself as despair? How many of you have pictures of a parent that is on a case as despair? Or even an entire photo album? So there were things that I did and didn't do that got me to the epitome of despair and apathy. But there were things that other people and the system said and did to perpetuate it. like the unspoken message that the foster family is better than you and that you are the problem and your kids are better off without you. This is implied when you're publicly persecuted and your children are removed from you and no services or programs are offered or even exist to keep you all together. I fluctuated between despair and anger and apathy. When I was angry, I actually had found the will and determination to overcome the barriers standing in the way of my goals, but I lacked the pathways, or the ones that were offered didn't include my whole family. So I looked angry and I got labeled, and people held their hand up to keep me away from them. In this picture that you see, I had to choose getting addiction treatment over keeping my housing voucher. To reunite, I had to choose between kids. These are soul-crushing experiences that efficiently diminish hope by limiting pathways and diminishing your willpower simultaneously. There were also glimmers of hope offered throughout my child welfare experience that helped me move forward to achieve my goals. Things that I had my part in cultivating, and there were things that people said and did to amplify it. One person who helped change everything in my case was my guardian ad litem. Until she came in with her openness and curiosity, no one could see the dire situation that my children were in, or all the small accomplishments I'd made that accumulated into big changes in my life and myself. She met my children in a foster home that they had been in for almost 2 years, and things were not adding up and they just didn't feel right to her. She wanted to support the placement my kids were in, but she quickly discovered that they were being abused and neglected and needed moved immediately. She reached out to me too, although when she read my case file, she only had information that depicted this picture right here. None of my recent accomplishments were included, but she called me anyway, and she came to visit me. Though no one had listened before, I showed her my certificates, my job, my support, and I told her everything I had done in recovery over the last 14 months. I met her again at an emergency FTDM. She stuck up for me and highlighted all the changes and strengths about me that she had learned. No one had ever done that for me before in a setting like that. The other stakeholders, they opened their minds and their hearts, and that was the turning point in my case. I didn't reunite with my kids that day, but my visits were restored and she stayed in my life. Some things that she did to open up willpower and pathways for me. She introduced me to the new foster parents and supported us in exchanging numbers and email addresses. She continued to support us in building a relationship every opportunity that she could. She was building pathways for me and for them and for my children. She made sure that I was invited to and I knew about the medical appointments for my children, and I knew who their providers were. More pathways, right? She encouraged me and helped me build the courage to ask questions about my children's treatments. Like I needed that, somebody to inspire that agency, that willpower, that courage. She visited me before and after my visits with my kids, and she helped me celebrate small wins like showing up, or even if I was late or canceling in advance. And this really helped me build self-agency. When she had concerns, she talked to me about them first, and she helped me understand where she was coming from before she announced them in court. She helped me connect with the system stakeholders in my case and modeled to me how to work with them. And she helped me visualize and see myself with my children as the mother that she knew I could be given the chance. She helped me and my kids get into a supportive living program and physically helped us move in, just building more pathways, telling me that I'm important. My GAL expanded the way she defined her role as being as advocating for the best interest of the children, to being the eyes and the ears for the court while my children were separated from me. She won my trust and she grew my admiration. And we still have a relationship today, over 14 years later. She recently called me in to support her in accomplishing her goal, which is a program that she's building to keep parents with their babies post NICU and wrap around them for the first few months to promote their bond and guide them on the path to wellness and healing together. And because of all the hope that she has invested, and many others have invested in me, I work on national and international levels of child welfare and family empowerment and parent engagement projects. I utilize the skills and experience of parents like me and build them up into leadership positions and support them in being the parents that they have always wanted to be. Through Children's Home Society of Washington's Parents for Parents program, I get to help states across the nation create pathways and community for parents to develop employment skills, and while providing hope-centered framework that supports and educates currently involved parents about how to successfully navigate the child welfare system. Parents for Parents is currently a Washington state program, so all of you and your parents that you work with have access to it. Another way to promote willpower and waypower in parents you work with is to connect them with your local P4P program and support the program itself by presenting at a class or recruiting parents whose cases are closing that you know of that have inspired you, and then they can come work with us and be a Parents for Parents program parent ally. So my children, I have a 26-year-old who just bought a house. He is happily married and he's a union worker, and he's given me the gift of 2 beautiful grandchildren. My 21-year-old is a Walla Walla University of Washington student in the social work program, which is amazing because his dad actually served time in Walla Walla State Penitentiary. My third oldest is working with, he's in the trades as a painter, and he has his own home and he's doing very well. My oldest daughter, my 4th oldest, she is in her senior year of high school, and she just turned 18. And of course, she wants to be independent and make her own decisions. And I am supporting her as she does that. And my youngest daughter is in driver's ed and in her junior year, and just doing amazing. And the beautiful thing is that I decided to have another baby. And since I've been in recovery, so I have a 2-year-old. He's my youngest son, and he's never been involved in child welfare. I just have so much love, and I'm such a nurturing mom-like figure that I love my children, and the biggest accomplishment I'll ever achieve is reuniting with them and being the mom that I've always wanted to be. And I really appreciate you and the work that you do and your compassion in this. And I just really want to join forces with you to help replicate the success that we've had, because we know parents are capable and worthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambrosia and Heather. Sharing your story can be a difficult thing, so I encourage folks to thank Heather and Ambrosia in the chat. And then next, we are going to do that part I told you about earlier, where we're going to ask you to either use your phone or open another computer screen and go to www.menti.com, and the code that you'll put into that website when it asks for it is 4591263. And the question we're going to ask you to answer is, what are you already doing to increase hope for families? What are you already doing in your practice to increase hope for families? And I'm going to switch screens while everyone. What are you already doing to increase hope for families? Using resource lens. Encouraging court proceedings to move forward in a timely manner. Being positive, non-biased, and just being available. Listening and stay open-minded about solutions, empowering families to advocate for themselves. Sharing resources. I'm in training. Just keeping all parties in case informed about what's next. I meet regularly with parents, persisting in making contact with parents, encouraging the family about and communicating. Complimenting on positive strengths. Encouragement. Acknowledge small goals achieved. Excellent. Focus for me has always been on the success of parents, knowing their outcome is the kiddo's outcome, focusing in on the positives. When asking about services, I always try to end with the goal of being to reunite with their children. Working with both the social workers and the children to ensure best interest is shared with the courts, listening to the foster parents and grandparents. Encouraging continued relationships with parents who have lost parental rights and have an open adoption agreement. All right, fantastic. Those are wonderful. I think Heather and Ambrosia agree, wonderful things that you're all doing to support families. And next, we are going to break out into breakout groups where we want to go over a scenario with you and talk about, in that scenario, things that we could do to increase hope for that family. And I'm going to drop into the chat the scenario, and then we'll also have the scenario in the breakout rooms. But for folks who want to open this on a computer screen, it's in the chat. And then Ryan, I'm going to ask you to break us out into 3 breakout groups with Heather, myself, and Ambrosia in each of those 3 rooms. No worries. I don't know what happened, but
I hit end meeting for all instead of end breakout.
you did
groups.
it.
I've
Okay,
never
I'm so glad
done that
it wasn't
before.
me.
I am so sorry.
That's all right. I mean, there's this thing called grace, you know, and I will say, as probably many of you know, especially when you're trying to operate an event like this, there are so many buttons to push. So it's easy to push the wrong one. I don't know about the rest of facilitators. I feel like our group had some really wonderful responses to share back to the group.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was amazing. So
good.
I took some notes too. Very conscientious, very compassionate responses.
Heather, do you want to start off by sharing out what your group shared?
Yeah, they talked about not really wanting to overwhelm the parent, really being keen on tuning into what the parent was going through and the information that they're able to take in at that time. Ooh. And so being very mindful of that and not not overwhelming them with information about the hearing that they missed, or trying to dig into why exactly, what barriers they're facing to being late, or having these missed, these missed appointments and stuff, but really listen and introduce themselves and comfort them. And also I heard one of the GALs or CASAs talk about connecting them to the P4P program. And yeah, and I know I'm missing stuff. So if one of my group members want to add, please feel free.
Yeah, if you have something to add and you're in Heather's group, please unmute yourself and add it.
I will just say what Heather said. I would just emphasize that, and that is to acknowledge them for them showing up. I mean, like, always important. Like, that's almost the way to start.
Yeah, just you showed up. You were late, and I bet you spent 5 times as much energy getting here, than I did, right? Like, and thank you. That shows me that you care about your children and you want to engage in this process.
Something I will add too, I like to do a little debrief after and just see how they're doing. If there's anything I can help with right then and there, to get them through, offer them some advice, just to get through the day, and then connect with them a day or so later just to check in on them again. I check in with my parents regularly. So just showing them that I care for them and I'm here for them, I think goes a long way.
Heck yeah. Thank you for that.
Ambrosia?
Sure. So our group first wanted to ensure that it was mom, and then introduce themselves as the CASA, and kind of check in and see how things are going. Potentially in that interaction, hearing that maybe there's some barriers around transportation that they could help troubleshoot with the parent. There was some questions on why wouldn't the CASA have been in contact with the parent sooner to help maybe mitigate some of those missed appointments. It was talked about like meeting parents at shelter care whenever possible. So that first court hearing, validating and verifying contact information, celebrating that the parent made it, even though it was, missed, really normalizing how stressful that could be, outlining supports to kind of help them know about like maybe things that they needed. I know Amy talked about like, could this parent have needed a way to set up their phone so calendars are aligned and they know what their appointments are, and like it, the phone kind of tells you where to be and helps you along with that, or maybe they need a planner or a calendar. Just helping them through how stressful this could be. It was wondered if mom had made it to the tail end of court and maybe heard how dad was being praised for being in compliance, and how awful that would feel as, to the mom, how she missed some opportunities, and just, normalizing that. Feel free to let me know if I missed anything, group members.
Yeah, if you're in Ambrosia's group and you want to unmute and add, please do. All right, thank you. In our group, we were fortunate enough to have a parent ally, a parent with lived experience. And so I want to elevate her voice first. And what she talked about and first was really how parent allies sharing their stories with other parents, that provides hope. And I think our group also agreed that when parent allies share their story, it also increases hope for us when we get to hear stories like Heather's and Ambrosia's. It also gives us hope for working with families. Our group talked about meeting parents right away to start developing trust. Like one thing they noticed was this Child advocate did not meet the parents until a couple months into the case, whereas meeting the parents right away and start forming that trust so that when the parent shows up for court late, they already have that established relationship. Using that opportunity to meet her, find out what her story is, what were the problems, the barriers for getting there, what did she need assistance with? Say that you are there to help. Letting the parent know that it's not over yet. Starting with thanking her for showing up. Offer to meet her at a different time, which is great because she's probably flustered in that moment, right? Or in distress. Say that the goal is to reunite first and foremost, and then what to do to facilitate that. We talked about text reminders for events. And then something that I like to add that I didn't get a chance to add with my group is I'm a big believer in mindful pauses. And so this parent was in distress. So some of the information that we'd want to give her, like problem solving, she might not be able to hear because she's not regulated herself. So how can we create space in that moment for her to decompress and get back into that place where she's calm and thinking again? And I know sometimes that's a matter of being calm and present ourselves and just sitting and creating that space. So those are the things we came up with in our group. Was there anything else that I missed? Please feel free to unmute and speak up. I think we have something in the chat. I missed that the scheduled time with the parent costs me at her place of choice, which could set up for a successful appointment. I love that, allowing the parent to choose the location. Is there anyone else from my group who wants to add? Okay,
I
great.
think just like knowing that being invited into someone's home is such a privilege and such a special gift that they are, you know, that they're extending that invitation. I know we don't get the privilege of a lot of privacy, or it kind of steals our dignity when we're involved in child welfare, because all of our dirty laundry is aired publicly. And if you're wondering, you know, why parents disappear and don't show up, it's the shame. It's a triggering reaction to just shrink and disappear. So just knowing that any extension of, you know, you telling them, I've been late before, like here's an example. And I understand how horrifying it is, and that it doesn't mean that this isn't important to you and that you didn't give your best to get here right on time. That really does create, it levels it out, right? It normalizes it and it bonds us, because now you're a human being too who makes mistakes. And this is the hope that you've offered to me to connect us.
Wonderful.
Beautiful.
Okay, we're going to have one more Mentimeter. So again, if you will go to menti.com, I'm going to share my screen. Everybody can see that. Okay, knowing what you just learned today, what are you going to do differently to increase hope moving forward? And that Menti code is at the top of the screen there. It's 45912663. And while we're waiting for folks to add their answers, somebody said in the chat, I've been that parent that has shown up late at a hearing, being bombarded with information, and it did not help my stress. So taking a moment to allow a parent to catch their breath and kind of ground and take one thing at a time is super helpful in my experience. Thank you. That's very helpful. I think all of us can think about those times where we've been overwhelmed and haven't been able to take in information and needed time to decompress before we could really be fully present. Okay,
Yeah,
we have
like
some,
if you're having like technical difficulties with the Mentimeter right now, just drop it in the chat.
oh, we're all being mindful.
Okay.
Okay, more active efforts to contact the mom. Wonderful. Be more positive and upbeat. Not judge the parent by the file or incident that brought their kids into care.
Mhm.
Smile and happy to meet the parent. Starbucks after courts and decompress. Oh, I know Starbucks helps me. Give parents grace when things are stressful and causing them anxiety. Wonderful. Take a moment to pause and be present. Really put myself in the parent's shoes and ask them what they need in that moment. Absolutely. If we can't be present, how can we ask them to be present? Be intentional with my approach and set parents up for success to build more success. Wonderful. Come alongside. That goes really well with those goals, right? If our goals have to align with the family's goals, and then we get to come alongside as they accomplish their goals. Offer support and encouragement. Let the parent know at the first meeting that we will want to get back, to get her, want her to get child back. Services are designed to help with this, not to punish. Great. Be less focused on gaining information and a better listener, more encouraging. Should be listening twice as much as we are talking, right? Work harder to get around barriers of meeting with the parents, for example, incarceration and difficulty getting responses. Stay in contact anyway with the parent, email, text, etc. Connecting early as possible in the case with the parent. Listen and understand, help define obstacles and problem solving. Help to see the goals. Those are the pathways right there, right? Taking time for mom or dad to relax. We talked about that, giving them space to decompress. In some cases, even assisting with, I've had folks do breathing exercises, whatever the parent needs and is open to. Always look for positive successes, however small. Tiny triumphs. Wonderful. Keep in touch with my parents and give positive feedback. Wonderful. Well, Ambrosia and Heather, this feels like a success based off of these examples. Well, next, for the last few minutes, we'd like to open it up for questions. I don't know if any child advocates have questions for Heather or Ambrosia. Got some stuff in the chat. Let me see.
Yes, actually, there is one like dad coordinator in the whole state holding down the fort, and there's a few dad program supports that are parent allies. We want more dads. Please give us dads.
We know a lot of dads, and unfortunately, due to we do have statewide funding. It is pretty minimal, okay? And dads are traditionally the providers for their families, and they face different expectations from their employers. It seems that mothers are supported more in taking time off work, doing volunteer work, and their employer working around their schedule, and dads can provide for their families in other employment fields that we would love to have more dads. And so we appreciate you guys as recruiters.
I like this in the chat. It says, I like the idea of being more curious. And the example is, what would you like to tell me about your situation? So really leaving it to parent to share their story and what parts of their story they'd like to share. believe in them, encourage them until they believe in themselves. Is the Parent Ally program in Jefferson County?
Jefferson County has a contract in place. They're looking to hire a parent with a lived child welfare experience. It's coming soon. It's in the works. If you know of any successful parents, please let me know. That could be an option, because I could certainly share that. It'll be under the courts, the program.
Do you have any other questions or inputs? The Chan's slides are going to be made available so that you can print them out if you choose. Like I said, the book, I think I read the book in 2 days, and Heather will attest that her book is bookmarked, and you really can use it as a reference guide as you work with children and families. It's really changed my life. It's changed how I parent, how I help my adult children navigate their lives, and thinking about their goals and creating pathways and changing pathways, as Ambrosia talked about. What can we do to build strong P4P group in our community? Ambrosia, would it be best to reach out to you with P4P questions?
The statewide ones, yes. So I'll drop my email address in the chat, and folks can follow up with me.
One thing
P4P. I was just going to say, Parent for Parent program really kind of took a hit during COVID because of the virtual hearings. Allies weren't able to attend hearings in person the way they have traditionally. And so we're really a big push in the state to help the program get back on its feet and be creative and thinking about solutions about how to connect parent allies with families as early in the case as possible. So if that's something, we definitely want to reach out to Ambrosia if that's something you're interested for your area. And then Heather.
Okay, I'm writing another book. I'm writing another book in the chat that I read to my toddler, and it is about the science of hope for children. So you guys have direct access to children, and it's really important to inspire hope. So if you get this book, Good Night Moonbright, it's about all the different parts of the world and the different continents and the animals. The moon asks the animals where they saw hope today. And there's science around that will explain more in the back of the book about how that impacts children. So please read this book to our children and inspire hope in them. And also you can ask that question to parents too.
I was just going to say, parents reading this to their kids, I assume it's both good for parent and child. Right?
It is. Yeah. I wish someone would have asked me more often where I saw hope today, because it would have changed the chemistry in my brain to shift from that negativity bias and that gloom and doom apathy, right, mindset to a hope mindset.
All right. Well,
I'm just going to jump right in and thank everyone, the facilitators, and thank you, ladies, for sharing your story and your life with us. And it's been a great session, and I just want to say that.
Oh, thank you, Marie. Well, if everyone wants to turn on their cameras, if you can do an applause, use sign language applause, or you can use the reactions if you can't turn on your camera. And thank you all. We've enjoyed this time with you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.